Before we start, kindly subscribe to my channel and tell me, where in the universe are you watching from? Jax Calder had always thought of himself as a practical man, a diplomat by trade. His life was built on logic, patience, and a knack for fixing problems. But as his spacecraft sputtered through the vastness of space, heading toward the coordinates he'd been given, Jax began to realize something wasn't quite right. The message had been clear: attend a diplomatic conference on Zarvok 7. He was supposed to meet with alien representatives, discuss trade agreements, and solve the tensions between Earth and this far-off world. Simple, right? But the universe had other plans for him. As his ship neared the planet, a sudden warning light blared. Error. The voice of the ship's AI droned. Coordinates mismatch detected. Proceeding to alternate destination. Jax groaned and hit the console. No. I'm supposed to land at the conference center, not. Before he could finish, his ship was already spiraling toward the surface of Zarvok 7. He cursed under his breath as he tried desperately to gain control, but the damage was done. The ship crash-landed with a violent thud, skidding across the ground before coming to an abrupt halt. Disoriented but unhurt, Jax climbed out of the wreckage, shaking off the confusion. The first thing he saw were the crowds of brightly dressed aliens gathered in front of what looked like a massive temple. Banners hung from the pillars, fluttering in the wind, depicting a symbol that meant nothing to him. There were musicians, dancers, and a large platform that resembled a stage. Not the conference center. Jax muttered to himself, eyes wide. I've crashed an alien wedding. Before he could even think about making a hasty retreat, a woman approached, her presence commanding attention. She was tall, with sharp eyes that seemed to pierce right through him. Her name was Leora Verithis, a warrior princess from one of the most powerful families on Zarvok 7. She had dark, gleaming hair pulled back into a tight braid and wore ceremonial armor decorated with intricate symbols. Her gaze locked onto Jax, and she did not look happy. You, she said, her voice rich with authority. You are the one who disrupted our sacred ceremony. Jax, still dazed, could only stare back, trying to piece together the mess he'd gotten himself into. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. I was just looking for the conference, and I think I got a little lost. Leora's eyes narrowed, clearly unimpressed. Lost. Your ship has crashed into the wedding grounds of the Verithis clan. This is a violation. Jax looked around, hoping someone might intervene, but it was clear they were all waiting for her next move. The pressure mounted, and he could feel the weight of the moment crashing down on him. I'm not part of this wedding. I'm not even. Before he could finish his sentence, a large, imposing figure appeared beside Leora. The man had a broad frame and a scar that ran across his cheek, giving him a menacing appearance. He spoke with a deep, thunderous voice. You are now. The Verithis do not take kindly to insults, especially at such an important event. Jax's mind raced. What was going on? This was not what he had signed up for. Still, he was nothing if not adaptable, and he needed to get a handle on this situation before it spiraled even further out of control. I really don't think I'm supposed to be here, Jax said, trying his best to remain calm. I'm just a diplomat. I didn't mean to cause any trouble. Leora raised an eyebrow. A diplomat? Here, in the middle of our wedding? How amusing. The man beside her grunted. A human diplomat, no less. Perhaps he would like to prove himself worthy of being here. Jax wasn't sure if he was being offered a challenge or if they were mocking him. But one thing was clear. This was no ordinary wedding. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. And from the way everyone was watching him, it seemed that somehow he had become the center of attention. Listen, Jax said, his brain working at full speed. I don't want any trouble. I'm just here by accident. But if you want me to leave, I'll gladly go. I'll even pay for the damages to your... Leave, Leora interrupted. Oh, you misunderstand. The Verithis do not simply let go of things easily. Jax's heart sank as he realized he wasn't getting out of this wedding anytime soon. And with that, everything started to blur together. Alien customs, strange rules, and the impossible task of figuring out how he had gone from diplomat to groom in one wrong turn. Jax tried to back away slowly, but the Verithis warriors surrounding him made that impossible. He was trapped. There was no way out, and worse yet, the entire wedding party was staring at him like he was some kind of prize to be fought over. Leora stood at the front, her posture as stiff as a statue, her eyes locked on him with an intensity that made Jax feel like a bug under a microscope. The man next to her, the one with the scar, let out a low, rumbling laugh, clearly enjoying the situation. "You misunderstand," Leora said, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "It is not about leaving. It is about proving your worth." Jax blinked. "Proving my worth? For what?" "For marriage," Leora said matter-of-factly. "To me." Jax's jaw dropped, and his mind scrambled to catch up. "Wait, what? I don't think I signed up for that. I was just trying to find a conference." Leora raised an eyebrow, clearly not impressed by his frantic explanation. "You are now a part of this ceremony. Whether you wish it or not, you crashed our sacred grounds, disrupted our wedding, and now you are chosen as the groom." Jax felt like his stomach dropped to the floor. Chosen? Groom? This was madness. He had never wanted to be involved in an intergalactic marriage, and certainly not to a powerful alien warrior princess. Yet here he was, trapped in the middle of a ceremony he didn't even understand, being forced into a role he never imagined. He opened his mouth to protest, but the words caught in his throat as he noticed the reactions around him. The guests, all Verithis warriors, were whispering among themselves, exchanging curious glances. It was clear that Jax wasn't just some accidental guest. He was the main event now. Leora's piercing gaze softened for a fraction of a second, and then she spoke again. "You may not understand the ways of the Verithis, but this is your destiny. You have a choice, human. Either you accept this challenge, or you face the consequences of dishonoring us." Jax's mind raced. What was he supposed to do? He couldn't fight these aliens. He didn't even know the rules of their society. And he sure as hell didn't want to be part of a wedding that wasn't even his. But at the same time, he couldn't just back down and run away. He had to find a way out, or at least make it out without getting killed, or worse. "What kind of challenge?" he asked, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "The trial of the flame," Leora said with a cold smile. "A test of strength, wit, and honor. If you survive, you prove yourself worthy to be my husband. Fail, and you will be cast aside, humiliated before my entire clan." Jax swallowed hard. This wasn't what he signed up for, but there was no turning back now. He could already feel the weight of the eyes on him, watching his every move. If he ran, he'd be seen as weak, unworthy of anything but scorn. "So I just fight for my life?" he asked, his voice unsteady. "You must prove your worth in ways beyond combat," Leora said. "You must show us your mind, your spirit, and your strength." Jax looked around, at the warriors, the noblewomen, the colorful banners flapping in the wind. The whole situation was like something out of a bad dream. He had barely even started his mission, and now he was being forced into the role of a groom in an alien wedding. The stakes were impossible, but there was no other choice. "All right," Jax said, finding a tiny bit of confidence in his words. "I'll play your game, but I'm warning you, I don't play fair. I might not fight like you, but I'll find a way." Leora's lips curled into a smirk, a glint of amusement flashing in her eyes. "I look forward to seeing how a human survives our trials." Despite the tension in the air, Jax couldn't help but feel a strange flutter in his chest as he met her gaze. Leora's challenge wasn't just a test of strength, it was also a test of their wills, and Jax couldn't deny the pull of curiosity he felt toward this strong, fierce woman. She was like nothing he had ever encountered before. But there was no time for any of that. The trial would begin soon, and Jax had to focus. He didn't know what awaited him in the trial of the flame, but he would have to use every ounce of his ingenuity and wit if he was going to survive and, more importantly, get out of this mess. The ceremony had turned into a battle for his life, and for something far more complicated than he could have ever imagined. The trial of the flame was not what Jax expected. The moment Leora spoke, the atmosphere shifted. The festive, colorful wedding scene suddenly felt more like a battlefield. The crowd, once lively with music and laughter, became eerily quiet, eyes locked on Jax as they waited for him to take his first step into the trial. Jack swallowed hard, looking at the tall stone structure in the center of the arena. It resembled a giant swirling flame, glowing with an otherworldly energy. The arena was wide, its surface rough and uneven, like it had been worn down by years of battle. Several alien warriors stood nearby, their eyes filled with expectation. "You must face 3 challenges." Laura's voice rang out, clear and commanding. "The first is of strength, the second is of wit, and the final challenge will test your honor." Jax nodded, though his heart raced in his chest. He was a diplomat, not a fighter. He had spent his life negotiating, talking, convincing. He had never been in a situation where survival depended on his physical abilities. Yet here he was, standing in the middle of an alien wedding, preparing to prove himself worthy of being the groom. Lyra's eyes met his, and for a brief moment, Jack saw something in her gaze, something other than the cold distance of a princess. It was a flicker of something softer, like she was testing him, not just as a warrior, but as a person. But before he could dwell on that, a booming voice interrupted his thoughts. "The first challenge," the voice announced, "is the trial of strength. You must climb the obelisk of flames and retrieve the banner at the top." Jax looked up, and his stomach dropped. The obelisk was a towering spire of black stone, with what appeared to be a swirling vortex of fire at its peak. It was impossibly high, and the flames danced and roared around it, making the whole thing seem even more dangerous than it already looked. "Climb the obelisk," Jax muttered under his breath, his mind racing. He had never been much of an athlete. Sure, he could walk, run, and maybe even climb a few stairs, but this was something else entirely. Without giving him a chance to second-guess himself, the warriors surrounding the arena began chanting. The sound was rhythmic, a low, pulsing beat that made Jax's heart pound in his chest. It felt like the entire planet was waiting for him to act. "Go." Laura's voice was sharp. "Prove yourself." Jax took a deep breath and stepped toward the obelisk. The stone beneath his feet was uneven, and the heat from the flames was almost unbearable. He hesitated for just a moment, then grabbed onto the first handhold he could find, a jagged stone protruding from the side of the obelisk. It wasn't graceful, it wasn't smooth, but it was enough. Slowly, with a lot of grunting and struggling, Jax pulled himself higher, ignoring the sweat that trickled down his face. The flames above him roared, threatening to scorch him at any moment. But he pushed on. He had no choice. Each step was harder than the last. His muscles burned with the effort, and his hands were slick with sweat as they gripped the jagged stone. Every time he looked up, the banner seemed even farther out of reach. But the thought of turning back wasn't an option. The warriors below cheered, their voices rising in intensity as Jax made his way up. He could hear the tension in their chants. Some were mocking, others encouraging him, but all of them were watching, waiting for him to fail. When he finally reached the top, his fingers trembling, he grabbed the banner, feeling its rough fabric against his palm. It was a small victory, but it was a victory nonetheless. He had done it. He had climbed the obelisk of flames and retrieved the banner. His heart pounded with exhilaration as he carefully made his way down, each step a challenge of its own. When Jax's feet finally touched the ground, the crowd erupted into applause. Some of the warriors even nodded in approval, their eyes less skeptical than they had been before. He had done it. Lyra stood at the front of the arena, her expression unreadable. She gave a small, approving nod, though her eyes still held that same intensity. "The first challenge is complete," she said, her voice carrying across the arena. "Now, the second challenge. Wit." Jax couldn't help but feel a small smile tug at his lips. Wit he could handle. After all, diplomacy was all about quick thinking and clever words. He had a feeling this next challenge would be more his style. But he couldn't get too cocky. The stakes were high, and Lyra's trials were far from over. The crowd's attention shifted, and Jax prepared himself for whatever came next, feeling a strange mixture of relief and excitement. He had taken the first step, and somehow he had survived. Now it was time for the real challenge to begin. Jax stood at the edge of the arena, panting heavily, his hands still slick with sweat from the grueling climb. The obelisk of flames had tested his strength, but it was nothing compared to what he was about to face. The crowd was quieter now, sensing that the next trial would be different. This time, it wasn't about brawn, it was about brains. Leora stepped forward, her presence commanding and sharp. Her eyes met his, and there was that same glint of challenge in her gaze. This wasn't just a trial, it was a game. A mental battle where failure could be just as humiliating as losing a fight. The second challenge, Leora said, her voice cutting through the silence, is the trial of wit. In this trial, you must outsmart us. Solve the puzzle of the rooms of Zarvok, and you will prove your intelligence. Fail, and you will forfeit. Jax raised an eyebrow. Runes, a puzzle. This was more like his speed. He had a knack for problem-solving, figuring out how things worked, and he had a million tricks up his sleeve when it came to finding clever solutions. This was his chance to show Leora, and everyone else, that he wasn't just a pretty face in a wedding dress. The runes of Zarvok were etched into a giant stone tablet that stood before him. The symbols were unfamiliar, swirling in complex patterns that made no sense at first glance. Jack stepped closer, studying the runes intently, trying to discern some kind of logic behind them. He could hear the whispers of the crowd, eager to see if he could figure this out. It was clear this wasn't just a test of knowledge. It was a test of how quickly he could think on his feet. A booming voice from the announcer rang out, making the air feel thick with anticipation. To pass this trial, you must uncover the hidden pattern. The first symbol on the left will guide you. Follow its lead, and you will succeed. Jax frowned. That was it. Just figure out the first symbol. He studied the stone again, searching for some clue that might reveal the answer. The symbols looked like nothing he had ever seen before. Abstract shapes, spirals, and dots. It was almost like a foreign language written in stone. His mind raced as he thought back to his training in diplomacy. He wasn't a mathematician, but he had learned how to think logically, how to read people and patterns. And that's when it hit him. These weren't random symbols. They were clues, each one linked to the others in a specific order. Jax took a deep breath and traced his finger along the first rune. It was shaped like a crescent moon, with a dot in the center. He looked at the second symbol. It was a circle, broken in half, with two sharp lines cutting through it. He didn't know what it meant, but he had a hunch. Focus on the idea of balance, Jax muttered to himself, then quickly matched the circle with the crescent moon. It wasn't just about shapes, it was about the idea behind them. The moon symbol represented cycles, while the circle was about unity. He could see it now. The first step was harmony. With his mind focused, Jax followed the rest of the runes, matching them up with what he thought the patterns represented. Each symbol fit into a larger puzzle, and the answer seemed to grow clearer with every passing second. His fingers moved faster now, tracing the lines and curves of the ancient markings. Leora, standing off to the side, watched him with an expression that was impossible to read. The warriors around the arena murmured in hushed tones. Some of them clearly didn't believe Jax could solve the puzzle. They were used to seeing their warriors fight with strength and honor, not with brains. But Jax was starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, he could win this challenge. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Jax reached the last rune. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place, and the stone tablet glowed with a soft golden light. The symbols shimmered, rearranging themselves as the answer appeared before him. Jax stepped back, a grin tugging at the corners of his lips. He had done it. He had solved the runes of Zarvok. There was a moment of stunned silence before the crowd erupted into applause. The Verithus warriors cheered, some in disbelief, others in admiration. It wasn't just the fact that Jax had solved the puzzle, it was how quickly he had done it, how he had approached it with a calm and calculated mind. Lyra's expression softened, just for a second, before she regained her composure. She nodded, the tiniest hint of approval in her gaze. "You have passed the second trial," she said, her voice colder now, but with a hint of respect. "You are not just a diplomat, but a worthy opponent." He met Leora's eyes, his heart beating faster than it should have. There was something more here than just a challenge. There was a connection, a spark that neither of them could deny. And whatever happened next, Jax knew one thing. He wasn't going to give up without a fight. Jax stood in the center of the arena, feeling the weight of every eye on him. He had passed the first two trials, strength and wit. But this third trial, the trial of honor, was different. He could fight, he could think. But honor, that was a much trickier thing. Leora stepped forward, her gaze locked on him. The trial of honor is not about proving your strength or intelligence, she said. It is about proving your heart. Jax swallowed. That sounded vague and dangerous. A Verithis elder, his voice deep and commanding, raised a ceremonial staff. Honor is the foundation of our people. To complete this trial, you must make a choice, a test of sacrifice. The ground rumbled as two warriors approached, dragging a large metal cage into the arena. Inside, a creature growled, a reptilian beast with glowing red eyes and thick, plated armor covering its body. Jax took an instinctive step back. The thing was massive, easily the size of a car, its sharp claws digging into the floor as it thrashed against the cage. Lyra's voice was steady. This is the Vornak, a sacred beast. It was taken from the wild and trained for war. It is deadly, but it does not deserve to be caged. Jax glanced at her, confused. Okay, so what's the trial? The elder's eyes gleamed. You have two choices, Offworlder. Slay the Vornak to prove your dominance, or free it and face the consequences. Jax's stomach dropped. He knew what they were doing. This wasn't just a test of skill. It was a moral trap. If he killed the beast, he would be seen as strong, but at the cost of mercy. If he freed it, he would have to deal with an angry wild monster and possibly an arena full of warriors eager to see blood. He took a slow breath. He had come this far by trusting himself. He needed to do that now. Jax stepped toward the cage. The Vornak growled, its glowing eyes narrowing as he approached. Easy, big guy, he muttered. I'm not here to hurt you. The crowd murmured in confusion. The warriors were expecting a fight, but Jax wasn't reaching for a weapon. Instead, he crouched near the cage and studied the creature. It was afraid. He could see it in the way it moved, the way its powerful muscles twitched as if expecting pain. Lyra's expression remained unreadable, but there was something in her posture, a quiet interest. Jax straightened. This creature isn't my enemy, he said firmly. His voice echoed through the arena. It was captured, trained, forced to fight. That's not honor. That's cruelty. A few warriors scoffed. Others shifted uncomfortably. Jax placed a hand on the cage's locking mechanism. I'm setting it free. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The elder frowned. You understand the risk? If it attacks, you will have no weapons, no protection. Jax nodded. Honor isn't about proving power. It's about doing what's right. The elder studied him for a long moment. Then, with a slow nod, he gestured for the cage to be opened. The lock clicked. The door creaked. For a tense second, nothing happened. Then the Vornak lunged. Jax didn't flinch. He stood his ground as the beast charged forward, only to stop just inches from him. The creature growled, sniffed the air, and then lowered its head. Jax exhaled. Carefully, he reached out and placed a hand on the Vornak's thick hide. The beast didn't resist. The arena was silent. Then, a roar of approval erupted from the crowd. The elder smiled. You have passed the trial of honor. Leora took a step forward, her eyes locking onto Jax's. For the first time, her expression softened. There was something new there, something warm. She held out a hand. You are more than I expected, Jax. He took her hand without hesitation. And you are more than I ever could have imagined. The wedding was no longer just a ceremony. It was the start of something much bigger. Jax had survived the trials, strength, wit, and honor. 3 challenges designed to test not only his abilities but his soul. And yet, as he stood before the towering Verithis elders, he felt like the real challenge was only beginning. The wedding. The Verithis people had accepted him, but that didn't mean everything was settled. He could still walk away. He could still say no. Leora stood beside him, her expression unreadable. She had watched him pass every test, had seen him choose mercy when others expected violence, and strength when others doubted him. She had expected to marry a warrior, but Jax knew she was now seeing something else. Something unexpected. The trials are complete, the elder announced. His voice boomed across the grand ceremonial hall, where dozens of Verithis warriors had gathered. Jax has proven himself worthy." A loud cheer erupted, fists pounding against chests in approval. Jax barely had time to process the moment before the elder turned to him with a knowing gaze. "But worthiness is only one part of the bond," the elder continued. "The choice is yours." Jax's stomach tightened. He had spent so much time fighting for survival that he hadn't really stopped to think about what it all meant. He glanced at Leora. She was watching him closely, her gaze sharp, but there was something else in her eyes, something uncertain. She wasn't sure what he would do. Jax took a slow breath. He could see the path in front of him clearly now. If he walked away, the Verithis would respect his decision. He could return to Earth, tell the story of how he crashed an alien wedding, and live to talk about it. He could go back to his old life. But as he looked at Leora, something inside him told him he wouldn't be the same. This place, these people, had changed him. She had changed him. "I came here by accident," Jax said, his voice steady. "I didn't expect any of this. I sure as hell didn't expect to pass your trials." A few warriors chuckled at that. He smiled faintly, then turned back to Leora. "But the truth is, I didn't fight just to survive. I fought because something about this place, about you, made me want to prove myself." Leora's gaze flickered, a rare moment of emotion flashing across her face. Jax exhaled. "So if you'll have me, then yeah, I choose this. I choose you." The hall erupted into cheers once more. The warriors raised their weapons in celebration. The elders nodded in approval. And then, Leora did something that caught him completely off guard. She reached out, took his face in her hands, and pulled him into a fierce kiss. It was sudden, intense, and left his heart pounding. The crowd roared in approval, but Jax barely heard them. All he could focus on was the fire in her touch, the unspoken challenge in the way she kissed him. It wasn't just affection, it was a promise. When she pulled away, her gaze locked onto his. "You fought well," she murmured, "but you do realize this was the easy part, don't you?" Jax smirked. "Oh, I figured. Marriage to a warrior princess. Yeah." The real adventure was just beginning. Jax had survived brutal trials, impressed an entire alien species, and somehow found himself engaged to a warrior princess. But as he stood in the center of the Grand Verithis wedding hall, he realized something terrifying. Nothing had prepared him for an alien wedding. Drums pounded in a rhythmic beat, shaking the very ground beneath his feet. Hundreds of warriors gathered in a massive circular hall carved from black stone, torches lighting the space with a golden glow. The scent of burning incense and something vaguely spicy filled the air. At the center, an enormous fire pit blazed, crackling as Verithis elders chanted words in a language Jax still hadn't quite figured out. And then there was Leora. She stood across from him, holding a ceremonial dagger in one hand and a cup of something dark and thick in the other. Her gaze was steady, fierce, and maybe, just maybe, a little amused. Jax swallowed hard. "So, how does this work again?" A warrior beside him chuckled. "You drink, you cut, you survive." "Great, simple," Jax sighed. "Totally normal wedding stuff." Leora stepped forward, raising the cup. "The blood oath binds us," she declared. "A promise that we stand as one. In battle, in honor, in life." The crowd murmured in approval. Jax had to admit it sounded intense, but kind of poetic. Then she handed him the cup. Jax peered inside. The liquid was thick, dark red, and steaming slightly. Was it a drink? A potion? Alien cough syrup? He had no idea, but refusing would be a bad idea. With a deep breath, he brought the cup to his lips and took a sip. It burned like fire and hit his stomach like a punch. Jax coughed, his eyes watering as he fought to keep his face calm. "Tastes strong." Leora smirked. "It should. It's the essence of the warrior's heart." Jax really hoped that wasn't literal. The crowd cheered as he handed the cup back. Then came the dagger. Leora raised her palm and, without hesitation, sliced a thin line across it. A single drop of blood fell into the fire. The flames roared in response, turning blue for a brief moment before settling again. She turned to him, offering the dagger. Jax hesitated. He wasn't exactly a fan of cutting himself in front of hundreds of people, but there was no backing out now. Taking a deep breath, he pressed the blade against his palm and made a quick, shallow cut. The sting was sharp but manageable. He let a drop of his blood fall into the fire. The moment it touched the flames, a deep hum echoed through the hall. The air vibrated with energy, and for a second, Jax felt something ancient and powerful settling over him. It was done. The wedding was complete. The Verithus warriors erupted into cheers, pounding their fists against their chests in approval. Drums boomed louder, and suddenly, the entire hall became a whirlwind of celebration. Jax barely had time to react before someone shoved a massive cup of alien ale into his hands. A warrior clapped him on the back hard enough to nearly knock him over. Liora smirked, clearly enjoying his discomfort. "Did you think it would be simple?" she asked, amusement in her voice. Jax groaned, rubbing his sore shoulder. "Oh, I don't know. I guess I just wasn't expecting to get mildly stabbed at my own wedding." She leaned in slightly, her voice dropping so only he could hear. "You handled it well." Something in her tone sent a shiver down his spine. A challenge, a promise. Jax took a deep breath. He had survived the trials, the wedding, and the insane customs of an alien warrior clan. But as he looked at Liora, he realized the real adventure was only beginning. The wedding feast was unlike anything Jax had ever experienced. Verithus warriors danced in a wild display of strength and agility, clashing weapons in mock battles while the crowd cheered. Massive tables overflowed with strange meats, glowing fruits, and drinks that sent warmth through his veins with just a sip. The air smelled of spice, smoke, and something vaguely sweet. Jax sat beside Liora, still trying to process everything. Hours ago, he had been a lost human trapped in an alien wedding. Now, he was a husband, tied to an alien warrior princess in a bond that was both sacred and unbreakable. Liora turned to him, her gaze sharp but thoughtful. "You are quiet." Jax smirked, leaning back, just taking it all in. "You guys really know how to throw a party." She chuckled, sipping from a metal cup. "A wedding is a time for celebration, but tomorrow, the real work begins." Jax raised an eyebrow. "Real work?" Liora studied him for a moment before answering. "You are one of us now, but not all Verithus will accept an outsider so easily. Some will challenge you, some will question your place." Jax exhaled. He had expected that. Winning a few trials wasn't the same as truly belonging. "And what about you?" he asked. "Do you think I belong?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached for something at her belt and placed it on the table between them, a small curved dagger with intricate markings along the blade. "A warrior's blade is earned, not given," she said. "This was my mother's. She carried it into battle. She swore to protect those she loved." Jax frowned. "Why are you telling me this?" Liora met his gaze, her voice quieter now. "Because I am giving it to you." Jax blinked. He had expected a challenge, maybe even another test, but not this. Slowly, he picked up the dagger, feeling the weight of it in his hand. It wasn't just a weapon, it was a symbol. "You trust me with this?" he asked. Liora nodded. "You have proven your strength, your honor, but more than that, you have shown me something greater. You have chosen this life, not because you had to, but because you wanted to." Jax turned the dagger over in his hands, the firelight reflecting off the metal. He wasn't just some accidental groom anymore. This wasn't just a strange adventure. This was his home now. He looked back at Liora and grinned. "Well, if I'm going to be a warrior husband, I should probably learn how to use this properly." Liora smirked. "Then tomorrow, we train." Jax laughed, shaking his head. "Of course we do." The night continued with more music, more laughter, and more of the strange fiery drink that made his head spin. But through it all, one thought stayed in his mind. He had crashed an alien wedding. Now he was part of something much bigger, and he wouldn't have it any other way.